She took the wrong package, Mr. Thorne, the one stamped "Do Not Cross." The junior assistant managed to choke out the words before collapsing against the mahogany desk. Elias Thorne did not move from the shadow of the massive stone fireplace. His face, usually a study in controlled ice, narrowed, revealing the fine silver scar that tracked his jawline. It wasn't the volatile corporate schematics inside the box that triggered his wrath. It was the transgression, the invisible limit of his world violently crossed by a stranger. "Find her," Thorne commanded, the sound barely a whisper, yet it dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "Tell her the cost of that mistake is permanence. She works for me now." The assistant froze, understanding instantly that the financial penalty would have been merciful. This was infinitely worse. The address led Maya to a discreet, steel-gated compound outside the city limits. She arrived not as a corporate thief, but as a temporary casualty of circumstance. Her younger brother Lucas, a new hire in the logistics firm, had been the one to misroute the high-security courier package during a late-night shift. Lucas was 18, fragile, and terrified of losing his college scholarship over a catastrophic clerical error. When Thorne's legal attaché, a precise woman named Miller, offered the punitive settlement, Maya didn't hesitate. Miller explained the options with clinical detachment. Lucas faced charges, professional blacklisting, and a civil suit that would bankrupt their family for 2 generations. Or Maya could sign a 3-month non-disclosure, non-compete agreement and accept reassignment to the Thorne estate. "What is the reassignment?" Maya asked, pulling her worn leather bag tighter. "You will manage the upkeep of Mr. Thorne's private residence," Miller stated, flipping a thick contract page. "Full-time, live-in, no contact with the outside world beyond necessary essentials. You are not a housekeeper. You are the operational manager of the isolation. 3 months. That is the cost of the transgression." Maya read the final clause. Any premature termination of the contract by her would result in the immediate and retroactive activation of all penalties against Lucas. It was clean blackmail, built on legal boilerplate. She looked at the signature line. Lucas was safe if she disappeared for 90 days. It wasn't bravery, it was math. "I need to inform my landlord. I'm vacating." "Done," Miller replied, handing her a keycard, the color of matte obsidian. "Your personal life is now irrelevant. You start immediately." Maya didn't hug Miller, didn't argue the morality of the arrangement, and didn't lament the loss of her modest apartment or her waitressing job. She signed the papers, the ink a silent surrender. The contract wasn't a punishment for her error, but a practical shield for her brothers. When she walked through the steel gates, she knew the world on the other side would be unforgiving. But Lucas was already forgotten by the Thorne organization. That was the only thing that mattered. She had traded her freedom for his future. The gates closed behind her with the sound of finality. The estate was called Ashwood. It wasn't opulent in the common sense, but it was vast, built of dark stone and glass, commanding a view of the Atlantic that felt less like beauty and more like isolation. The silence inside was physical, absorbing sound until Maya could hear the faint, high-pitched hum of the ventilation system. The furniture was minimal, expensive, and placed with the geometric precision of a corporate headquarters, not a home. Everything was immaculate, untouchable. Thorne himself appeared after a few hours, materializing from a hallway that seemed to lead nowhere. He was taller than she expected, dressed in tailored black that made the silver in his hair appear premature. He didn't offer a greeting, nor did he look directly at her. "The inventory is digital. Miller uploaded the protocols," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of cadence. "You manage the operational flow. You don't manage me." He pointed to a small, almost hidden door near the service entrance. "Your quarters. Small, practical. You eat in the service kitchen, you stay off the third floor, you don't enter the library unless explicitly called, and you maintain complete silence between midnight and 6 a.m. Questions? The rules were clear. Maintain the environment, but never acknowledge the human being in it. He didn't enforce the rules with shouting, he enforced them with pure, cold expectation. His cruelty wasn't active, it was the passive, functional cruelty of someone who had entirely removed the concept of human warmth from his life. He managed Ashwood like a secure data center, and Maya was just another highly sensitive security measure. The laundry schedule for the restricted items, Maya started. It's on the terminal. Follow the sequence. If you deviate, the contract is terminated, and the original terms are enforced. He didn't wait for her to finish, turning his back with practiced indifference. The man wasn't a master of a house. He was a sentinel in a tomb. She realized she was not working for him. She was working around him. This silence, this scale, this emptiness, it was the world he had built to protect himself from everything, most of all from need. If you're watching this story unfold, tell me in the comments where you are tuning in from. 2 weeks into her enforced residence, Maya found the rhythm of isolation. Her life became a sequence of precise functional tasks, ordering supplies, maintaining climate control, ensuring Thorne's specific, rarely touched meals were prepared by the catering service and placed exactly on the designated warming tray. She was a silent ghost. The confrontation came over a trivial object, a water glass. Thorne had a habit of leaving his half-filled glasses on the granite edge of the terrace railing, overlooking the cliff. It was an aesthetic oversight in his otherwise sterile world. Maya, following the protocol for morning clear-up, moved the glass. Thorne was already outside when she returned with the supply manifest. He was staring at the railing, his posture suddenly rigid. The missing glass had triggered a disproportionate seismic event. "Where is it?" he demanded, the voice low, dangerous. Maya did not flinch. "I returned it to the kitchen. It was on the ledge. Security protocol, high winds off the Atlantic, risk of shattering glass near the path." She recited the facts, not an apology. He took a step toward her, closing the distance she instinctively maintained. His eyes, a sharp, cold grey, bore into hers. "You are here to maintain the structure, not to interpret the structure. That glass remained there for a reason. Do not alter the environment beyond the documented task list. Do you understand the simplicity of this command, or do I need to reiterate the consequences of termination?" The threat was clear. The life of her brother was still the currency of her compliance. Maya felt a sharp wave of anger, but she swallowed it down. She realized the glass wasn't about security or protocol. It was about his control, his expectation that nothing, however small, should deviate from the moment he left it. "Understood," she replied, her voice steady, stripped of emotion. She met his gaze for a second too long, registering the volatile intensity behind the threat. It wasn't malice. It was the sheer terror of unpredictable change. He wasn't a villain enjoying power. He was a man terrified of losing the absolute certainty he had built around himself. She didn't argue the point. She simply turned and continued her documented task of checking the kitchen ventilation, leaving him standing alone by the railing, staring at the empty spot where the glass had been. She had found his tripwire, and it was proximity. 3 days after the incident with the water glass, Maya found Thorne in the library. It was 3 a.m., long past the mandatory silence period. He wasn't working. He was slumped over the massive antique desk, his expensive wool jacket wrinkled, a small, controlled tremor running through his left hand. The lighting was low, revealing the stark lines of exhaustion and pain etched around his eyes. He suffered from a severe chronic nerve condition, a detail Maya had read in the emergency medical protocols filed meticulously in the digital index. The pain was apparently triggered by stress and cold. The large library, designed for intellectual isolation, was always kept several degrees too cool for comfort. Thorn heard her enter. He immediately tried to straighten, pulling his sleeve down over the trembling hand, his jaw clenched in a silent fight against the body's betrayal. "Get out!" he rasped, the word tight with humiliation and pain. Maya ignored the command. She did not approach the desk. Instead, she went directly to the wall unit, located the thermostat, a device she wasn't supposed to touch, and manually increased the temperature by 4 degrees. She located the first aid cupboard, bypassed the high-grade prescription medication he clearly needed but refused to take, and pulled out a simple, medically approved heat pack. She activated the pack and placed it silently on the edge of the desk, several feet from his reach, next to the terminal he used for his work. She never looked at his face. Her movements were purely functional, like repairing a faulty circuit. "I have increased the ambient temperature," she stated, her voice low. "The heat pack is self-regulating. It needs to be against the back of the neck for 20 minutes. It won't interfere with your work." She turned to leave. "Maya," he said, her name a rough friction against his throat. It was the first time he had used it. "I don't require your assistance." "It's not assistance, Mr. Thorn," she replied without turning back. "It's management of environmental factors affecting required output. You are functionally compromised. I adjusted the environment." She left. The door closed quietly, leaving him alone with the heat pack and the rising temperature. He hated the intrusion, the witnessing of his physical failure, the silent assertion of control over his comfort. Yet he hated more the fact that she had observed the need, addressed it practically, and left without demanding gratitude, attention, or proximity. Slowly, tentatively, he reached for the heat pack. The conflict was immediate. The relief of the heat, battling the stinging awareness that she had seen him broken. The heat pack incident became an invisible fulcrum. Thorn never mentioned it, nor did Maya attempt to repeat the intimacy of the care. But a silent, subtle shift occurred in the fortress. Maya began leaving a specific mug, a sturdy, unpretentious ceramic one she found in the back of the pantry, on the edge of the service counter at 7:00 a.m., filled precisely 2/3 with dark, strong coffee. Thorn was rigid about his no-contact rule, but by 7:15 a.m., the mug would be gone. She never saw him take it. She just saw the empty space. The rules of silence remained, but the parameters shifted. He started working in the sunroom, a space Maya had rigorously organized instead of the library's heavy chill. When she needed to access the sunroom for inventory checks, he no longer ordered her out. He simply shifted his body, offering a fraction of a foot of space without lifting his eyes from his screens. The house began to breathe differently. Maya introduced a small cluster of low-maintenance succulents near the main window, a quiet invasion of green life into the sterile stone. Thorn noticed them the second day, but he didn't order their removal. He merely adjusted his own trajectory through the hallway so he didn't brush against the largest pot. He observed her too. It wasn't surveillance. It was a hungry, peripheral attention. He noticed her precision, the way she could manage a complex logistic chain while remaining utterly inconspicuous. He noticed her consistency. She never rushed, never lingered, never presumed. She was a predictable constant in a life dedicated to unpredictability and high-stakes chaos. One evening, retrieving an obscure file from a locked cabinet, Thorn inadvertently dropped a heavy leather-bound folder. It hit the marble with a startling clap. Maya, passing the hall, didn't stop, didn't offer help, and didn't even turn her head. She maintained her path, respecting the boundary of his failure. Thorn stared at her retreating back, the folder forgotten on the floor. Most people would have rushed forward, seeking acknowledgement or pity. She had offered neither. She had simply existed, reliably within her boundaries. The trust that grew was not affection, but the safe, powerful expectation that she would not violate the quiet space he desperately needed. He was starting to wait for the appearance of the sturdy mug. The precarious equilibrium shattered precisely 63 days into Maya's term. Thorne was preparing for a crucial, high-profile negotiation in Tokyo. The final briefing documents, meticulously organized by Maya, sat on his desk. He reviewed the itinerary, his mood already coiled tight with the pressure of the deal. He found the discrepancy when checking the encryption keys. A minor but critical sequence of characters was incorrect in the digital file backup, an error that could compromise the entire secure data chain. Thorne didn't pause for verification. He simply strode out of the office, finding Maya reviewing supply invoices in the service area. His control vanished, replaced by the raw, primitive fear of exposure. "The B7 sequence is wrong," he bit out, slamming his hand flat on the stainless steel counter. "This is gross negligence. Are you deliberately trying to sabotage this exchange?" Maya looked up, her expression calm despite the sudden spike in tension. "I entered the B7 sequence exactly as it was provided to me on the physical draft. The physical draft was signed by Miller last week. I don't care about Miller. You are the final operational filter here. You are paid to ensure perfection, not to shift blame." His face was pale with fury, not just at the error but at the potential for trust that had been violated. In his world, any mistake was a malicious attack. "You think you can rely on protocol? Protocol doesn't save an 8-figure contract. Your presence here is contingent on 0 error. Pack your things. Your contract is terminated immediately." The words hit her not as a surprise, but as an inevitable confirmation. She saw the fear behind his anger. The man was terrified of anything that depended on human reliability. She had been foolish enough to think her constancy mattered more than his absolute need for isolation. "Lucas is safe?" Maya asked, her only concern the terms of the original agreement. Thorne hesitated. "Miller will handle the termination logistics. Your brother is protected for now. Get out of my house." He didn't look away. He wanted her gone, proof that he could excise the one thing that had started to feel like routine. Maya pushed her chair back. There was no defense, no pleading. She simply retrieved her worn leather bag from her small room. As she walked toward the main gates, the sun was setting, casting long, black shadows that mirrored the coldness she felt. She left the keycard on the entry table, a silent resignation. She hadn't stayed for gratitude, and she wouldn't leave with vengeance. She had simply reached the end of the imposed limit. The heavy gates rolled closed behind her for the second time, but this time the silence that settled over Ashwood was a crushing vacuum, not merely an absence of noise. Thorne watched her through the tinted windows until the car was out of sight, and the terrible realization hit him. He hadn't fired an incompetent staff member. He had violently severed the only predictable line of warmth in his life. The first morning without Maya was merely an inconvenience. The 7:00 a.m. alarm went off, and Thorne waited briefly, unconsciously, for the sound of the service door closing. It didn't. At 7:15 a.m., the granite counter remained empty. He strode to the kitchen himself, annoyance tightening his shoulders, only to find the coffee maker had not been prepared. The precise ratios of water and grounds were missing. He made a terrible lukewarm brew that he immediately poured out. The days that followed were a rapid decline into functional chaos. He missed the Tokyo flight because the catering service had delivered the specific meal to the wrong gate, a mistake Maya would have intercepted hours before. He spent an extra night in a sterile corporate box, his nerve pain spiking violently from the unexpected, uncontrolled disruption. When he returned to Ashwood, the house was immaculate, thanks to a temporary rotating staff Miller had hired, but it was dead. The quiet was oppressive, not restful. The small cluster of succulents in the hallway was gone. The temp staff, unfamiliar with the unauthorized decor, had removed them. Thorne stared at the empty patch of floor, feeling a punch of irrational frustration. His schedule began to fray. He worked 18-hour stretches, then slept 12, his control mechanisms dissolving. He ate irregularly. The constant low-grade discomfort in his spine intensified, a physical manifestation of the mental void. The isolation he had cultivated for years had been a deliberate shield. Now, without Maya's predictable presence buffering the edges of his world, the shield turned inward, becoming a suffocating pressure. He realized the problem wasn't the lack of a capable employee. The problem was the lack of consistency. The temp staff followed the protocol, but they changed daily. They looked at the terminal, not at him. They didn't see the signs of strain, didn't adjust the thermostat by 4 degrees, didn't leave the sturdy ceramic mug. They simply clocked in and clocked out. One night, finding himself pacing the vast, cold library, he stopped by the railing where the water glass had once been. He hadn't been abandoned. He had been serviced, efficiently, but never cared for. Maya had provided the care, and in his monumental need for control, he had mistaken her consistency for obligation, not a choice she made daily. He had expelled her the moment her proximity threatened to expose his hidden dependencies. He hadn't been left, he had driven her away. The revelation was not a cinematic moment of tears, but a cold, hard knot of pain in his chest, forcing him to take a short, ragged breath. He finally understood that the error in the B7 sequence was irrelevant. The real mistake was believing he could afford to lose the only person who stayed on the perimeter, without demanding the center. Maya was back in her cramped apartment, waitressing double shifts to cover the months of lost income. She had been forced to cash out her emergency savings to ensure Lucas's tuition installment was paid on time, a financial risk Thorne's termination had amplified. One damp evening, Lucas burst into her apartment, not with terror, but with bewildered relief. He was holding a certified letter from the university's financial aid office. "They reinstated the scholarship fund," Lucas whispered, his hands trembling. "And they paid the entire semester. Not just a loan, Maya, a full grant. I don't understand. I didn't even apply for this grant." Maya looked at the official seal. The fund was highly specific, known only to a few major philanthropic organizations connected to the largest holding companies. It was anonymous, restrictive, and impossible to access without direct, high-level intervention. Thorne, miles away in Ashwood, was staring at a blank wall in his office, his fingers tracing the faint outline of the scar on his jaw. He had spent the last week untangling the bureaucratic nightmare Lucas was facing. He didn't just pay the tuition. He established an irrevocable, anonymously funded endowment in Lucas's name, guaranteeing his education in perpetuity, independent of Lucas's performance. It was more than Lucas would ever need. Thorne had also addressed the source of Maya's termination. He accessed the old physical draft of the briefing document, the one Miller had signed. The B7 error was not a transposition mistake on Maya's part. The physical draft, signed by Miller, already contained the typo. Maya had meticulously followed the corrupt source file. Miller had been sloppy. Thorne had fired Miller instantly, without ceremony. He sent a sealed, unpaged document via secure courier to Maya's old logistics firm. It was a complete waiver, stating that the original package transgression was nullified, and that all punitive clauses were legally voided, effective immediately. It contained no apology, no signature block for Maya, and no return address. It simply corrected the ledger. He did this knowing two things. Maya would likely never use the grant money for herself, and she might never return to Ashwood. He had acted not out of a desire for connection, but from a profound need to correct the injustice he had inflicted. Not the firing, but the false accusation that shattered her commitment. He wasn't reaching out to pull her back into his life. He was stabilizing her foundation so she could live her own life, free of his power. It was the highest form of care he knew, the protection of her autonomy. He had transitioned from controlling his environment to safeguarding hers, even if it meant remaining entirely alone in his tomb. A month after receiving the inexplicable waiver and witnessing Lucas's security, Maya drove back to Ashwood. She did not call ahead. She simply parked her ancient car outside the steel gates, walked up, and placed her hand on the cold access panel. She didn't press the button. Thorne, sitting in the sunroom, knew the exact moment she arrived. He felt the shift in the ambient pressure of the house, the sudden, terrible silence that preceded the sound of her potential departure. He didn't move for 10 minutes. Then he rose, walked to the main gate terminal, and pressed the release button. The gates slid open slowly. Maya walked across the gravel drive. Thorne was standing on the threshold, framed by the dark stone. He didn't invite her in. He didn't offer an explanation for the endowment or the waiver. "I need to adjust the climate control system," Maya said, her voice entirely flat, purely functional. "The reading for the south wing is unstable. I noticed it on the operational log before I left." It was a perfect excuse, a practical, technical reason to return without addressing the emotional chasm between them. Thorne simply stepped aside. "The key card," he said, holding out the matte obsidian rectangle. "I deactivated the time limit." Maya took the card. She didn't thank him. She walked past him, heading straight for the utility room. She didn't belong in the cold, silent rooms of the manor, and he knew it. But now she belonged with him. She spent the afternoon working on the cooling units. When she finished, she found him in the dining room, a space previously untouched. Two place settings were meticulously arranged at the end of the massive table, facing the window. His catering was laid out, and beside it, a small practical meal she recognized as the kind she used to make for herself. "I don't require silence after 6 p.m., Thorne stated, without looking up from his paper. It was not a request for conversation, but an amendment to the rules of isolation. Maya sat down. She did not try to fill the silence. They ate in the same predictable stillness that defined their existence. The house was still Ashwood, cold, grand, and demanding, and Thorne was still Elias Thorne, rigid, scarred, and incapable of easy affection. But when he reached for the small, heavy water pitcher, he knocked it slightly, and for a fractional moment, he hesitated, expecting the old panic. Maya simply reached out, steadying the pitcher before it could tip, then drew her hand back to her plate. He finished his meal, a heavy, isolating weight lifting from his shoulders. The family was not born of romance or grand declarations. It was born of two deeply flawed people sharing a quiet space, where the powerful man finally allowed his fragility to be managed by the practical woman who chose to remain. She was not his employee. She was his anchor. If this transformation resonated with you, show your support. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories of human connection and unexpected belonging.